Good morning and welcome to the first Power Breakfast of 2026. Thank you for being here this morning. My name is Chris Konetsky. I'm the president and group publisher of BPC, the parent company of the Business Record and DSM magazine. Thank you for starting your morning with us for what we know is going to be a very timely and relevant discussion to many here in the room and for our community. To the nonprofit leaders in the room, first I just want to thank you. The work you do isn't some nice to have, it's absolutely vital to the success of our community. And make no mistake, nonprofits, our businesses, and their work has never been more important or under more pressure or more strain. And so I think it's just proper this morning, just give a big round of applause to yourselves, to the nonprofit community for all the hard work that you do in the community. And of course, also to those who support nonprofits with your time, your talent, and your treasure, thank you. The demands on board members, donors, and volunteers have never been as high or is crucial to the philanthropic community. Let's give them a round of applause as well. So why this topic today? Why did the newsroom choose to talk about the nonprofit situation going on here in this community? BPC sits at a really interesting intersection, with the Business Record representing the business community and covering the business of nonprofits, and DSM magazine covering the arts and cultural community. We believe it's a key responsibility for us to foster connection and understanding, but because the needs of business and our community often overlap and weave together with the nonprofit community in a way that has allowed us to be the strong, resilient, and growing city, and the one that we, of course, intend to continue to be in the future. In a bit, our panel is going to dive into the discussion today, and they're going to approach the challenges facing the nonprofit sector in the way we often do. We're going to analyze and bring some clarity to the challenges and the issues that we're facing, and then we're going to work to help spark some discussion around what some of those solutions could be as we all go forward. But I want to make sure to highlight one of the ways BPC aims to help find solutions and connect business leaders with the nonprofit community. On your seats this morning, you'll find Pillars of Philanthropy. It's a beautiful publication. It's produced by the Business Record and DSM magazine teams, and it highlights the people, the organizations, and the issues that are shaping the nonprofit sector. It comes out every November, and most importantly, within that publication, you'll find more than 40 organizations and the impact of the work that they do. That's a huge net in this community. It's such an important, rich part of what we are as a community. It's one of the things that when I first came to Des Moines, I got to work for the Business Record, and I'll be honest, there was a point in time where I was looking around going, my job is to help businesses do business better, and I was doing that, and I was struggling to kind of connect the dots. And as I saw the impact in the way that the business community interacted with the nonprofit community and gave back to the community and did that in a way that was just rooted in what you're supposed to do here, that was the thing that made me realize that I had an avenue and a path to continue to contribute back in a way that meant a little bit more than just helping the business community. And so the Pillars of Philanthropy publication, if you're interested in participating in it, there's information on your table. But I'd encourage you, check out the publication. Find a nonprofit if you're not already providing time, treasure, talent to one of those organizations that to give back to, or find another one. But it's a great way to get connected in and start giving back. The support of that publication, of course, the support of events like today make it possible for us to have discussions about the impact that the nonprofit community has here. And with that, I'd like to take a moment to recognize our sponsors who are making today happen. Our first sponsor, as a top accounting and consulting firm serving all 50 states, Forvis Mazars is driven by a commitment to deliver an unmatched client experience. Joining us today, give her a warm welcome, is Jessica Richter.
All right, hello everyone, good morning to the first Power Breakfast of 2026. It is so great to see so many familiar faces this morning. I've gotten to speak with so many of you, and it's so great to be back. This event space is also gorgeous, and it's great to see everyone here. My name is Jessica Richter, audit partner and leader of our nonprofit education and public sector practice at our Des Moines Forvis Mazars office. I'd like to thank everyone for being here today. In my role, I get to work firsthand with many nonprofits around central Iowa, and I'm hearing many of the same things that you all are hearing. There's a lot of impact, a lot of changes, a lot of uncertainty going on, and it's really important that we're here today to have that conversation. I also serve on nonprofit boards, and so I'm right there with you trying to make these decisions and determine how we're gonna move forward. So it's really important. As we move forward, just like to say we're very proud to sponsor this event and glad to be here today. Thank you in advance to our panelists and to the Business Record for moderating today's discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. We're pleased to welcome back Lean Techniques as a sponsor of the Power Breakfast series. Lean Techniques is a trusted technology consulting firm that helps organizations make technology a true competitive advantage. Please welcome Danielle Brummer. She's the Chief Growth Officer at Lean Techniques.
All right, good morning, everyone. What a beautiful new space. It's great and a packed room. This is incredible. I'm so happy to have you guys host in this new space and bring us all together. I'm sure the caliber of content today and the panelists will be of the same great caliber it was in the previous space. And we're fortunate to be a sponsor again this year. I'm Danielle Brummer, the Chief Growth Officer and partner at Lean Techniques, a technology consultancy headquartered here in central Iowa. We've been placing a strong emphasis on modernization, as those of you who've heard me speak here in quarters past. And really, that's not just about the technology, right? It's the emphasis on how organizations adapt and stay resilient, build systems that actually support your mission, not get in the way of it, and continue delivering value in an environment that keeps shifting beneath our feet. This idea of modernization feels incredibly relevant to our nonprofit community here today, a sector feeling the pressure, as Chris has already mentioned, more right now than most. This topic is of particular interest to me because I also serve on a nonprofit, Tech Journey, and I'm fortunate to have a few of our board members here this morning. It's an organization that's been around for 10 years and has been focused on opening doors and providing access to technology to students and youth here in the Des Moines metro area that otherwise wouldn't have access or are underrepresented or underserved in our communities. Through our annual tech program and Girls Who Code. We feel our program is even more necessary with the accelerated adoption of AI and how education systems are being completely uprooted and workforce readiness is really uncertain, and there's a lot of fear around that. As many of you, I'm sure you all feel very, very passionate about the programs that you serve as well. I see firsthand how critical nonprofit organizations are, not only in filling these gaps, but in creating opportunity for these students and the connection and long-term impact for our community here in central Iowa. Of course, Tech Journey is so grateful for the support of several of the employers here, including Principal and many others, and we wouldn't make it possible without them. But I, along with my board, often have to make trade-offs, right? We're faced with not just decisions around budget and staffing, but who can we ultimately serve? How many folks can we ultimately serve with less budget and less resources available to us? So again, this topic matters, and we're really looking forward to the panel and seeing what perspectives they might have to share with us how we can continue to make a positive impact here in central Iowa. So on behalf of Lean Techniques and Tech Journey, thank you, Business Record, and for all of you here today.
Thank you, Daniel, and thank you to Lean Techniques. We're pleased to welcome a new sponsor this year, Principal Financial Group. Principal is a global financial company with approximately 20,000 employees, passionate about improving the wealth and well-being of people and businesses. And yesterday we had an opportunity to host the first of a new thing that we're doing called the CEO Masterclass, where there's about 18 new CEOs in the community that we're connecting with past leaders and some existing leaders as well. Brand new thing, and we did that yesterday upstairs, and Dan Houston, the longtime CEO for Principal, served on a little panel as part of that. And the very closing statement that he gave is the thing that you've heard said before. I've heard it said as well, but never maybe as clearly as Dan always says it. But the expectation as a CEO that you will give back your time, your treasure, and your talent. And that message was said to all 20 of those folks. And part of the goal of that group is to connect people and that wisdom that we've heard to make sure that thread continues through. But there's probably no, of course, organization that has demonstrated that quite like Principal. So let's give Principal a round of applause. And please welcome Jo Christine Miles. Jo Christine will also be serving as a panelist today. So Jo, go ahead and talk a little bit about Principal.
Good morning, everyone. It's a privilege to join you today. And on behalf of Principal, welcome to today's breakfast. I'm Jo Christine Miles. I lead Principal Foundation as well as Principal Community Relations. At Principal Foundation, our mission is grounded in a simple belief that people in communities thrive. They do their best when they have the resources they need to move forward on their terms and in a humane way. Every day, individuals and families face difficult choices, and too often those choices stem from long-standing disparities in access, opportunity, and support. The initiatives we champion, both Principal and Principal Foundation, are about creating opportunities and delivering resources so people and communities feel like a better future is not only possible, but is actually attainable. That belief is what brings us here today. The nonprofit sector is navigating unprecedented demand, higher need, tighter budgets, workforce strain, and systems stretched thin. And yet, nonprofits continue to show resilience, creativity, and above all, a deep commitment to service. Service that ends up benefiting all of us, directly or indirectly. At Principal and Principal Foundation, we see nonprofits as essential partners in strengthening communities, whether that's improving financial inclusion, supporting small and diverse businesses, expanding access to food, housing, or advancing educational and cultural opportunity. But partnership requires more than funding. It requires listening. It requires shared problem solving. I like to say shared imagining and dreaming. And it requires a long-term mindset that reduces barriers instead of adding more. Today's conversation is an invitation for us to listen and to co-imagine what's next and what's possible, for us to reach agreement on what matters. Because the pressures facing nonprofits and, quite frankly, our community are not theoretical, they're human. They affect the families who rely on domestic violence services, the neighbors seeking food support, cultural organizations that make our region vibrant, and the nonprofits on the front lines do the work every single day for people you know, you work with, you live next to, that you pass on the street. Thank you to the Business Record for elevating this dialogue, and to all the nonprofit leaders joining today's panel and joining us here today. We are grateful for your advocacy, your innovation, and your dedication to meeting the needs of our community for the benefit of us all. Thank you.
A big thank you to all of our sponsors for making this series possible. We've got a great group of panelists that are going to help answer all the questions and talk about today's topic. We'll go ahead and have you all start to come on out. Leading today's discussion is Business Record editor Sarah Dean and Fearless editor Macy Shofroth. Both are in a fantastic position, consistently covering and working with nonprofit organizations throughout the course of the year. They're going to do a great job leading the conversation today. So with that, can you please give the panelists and Macy and Sarah a big round of applause to welcome them. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. And good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. We're so glad to have a full room today for such an important conversation on the health and future of our local nonprofit sector, whose work touches lives day to day across central Iowa, including most, if not everyone, in today's room, whether that's professional or personal. Through those connections, we know that strains have increased on the nonprofit sector in the past year specifically, in some cases affecting capacity and the ability to do what they do to the best that they can. While they're figuring out how to lead and run their organizations and teams through a period of overall uncertainty, they're also managing the effects and influences of federal and state policy on their funding and operations, as well as the role of changing giving trends in the region and in the sector. But those effects are landing differently across the sector. So we wanted to take today's conversation and take the opportunity to dive deeper into those experiences and those impacts. So today, along with my co-moderator, Macy Shofroth, will check in with leaders from across the sector and discuss those current pressures, where those effects are appearing in our community, and discuss the ways that we position the sector for a strong and sustainable future going forward. We have a great group of panelists here today that I'm glad to welcome. Today we have with us Dr. Maria Corona, Executive Director of the Iowa Coalition Against Domestic Violence. Erin Davison Rippey, Senior Community Impact Officer at United Way of Central Iowa. Sally Dix, President of Bravo Greater Des Moines. Annette Hacker, Chief Communications and Strategy Officer at Food Bank of Iowa. Jo Christine Miles, Director of the Principal Foundation and Principal Community Relations. And Nikki Severson, Principal at Isaacson Severson Consulting. Thank you all so much for being here today, and we appreciate your time and insights. To kick off the panel, our first question, we're going to kind of level set and just focus on, where have those current pressures been, and how is it affecting individual nonprofits in the sector on the whole. So, Nikki, I'm going to have you start to kind of help us understand some of the broader issues you're seeing across the sector, and then we'll go down and have the rest of the panelists share a little bit about what they're seeing specifically from their roles.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, thank you. Thanks for having us, and thank you all for being here today. When I think about the nonprofits that I work with and the pressures that we've been experiencing recently, I think it all can kind of be summed up in one word, and that's uncertainty. Mm-hmm. There's uncertainty in funding, particularly as we see public funding changes, but then the trickle-down effects of how that's impacting corporate and individual funding, the uncertainty in the economy. Costs are rising, and those costs are rising for our nonprofits. And then as there's that economic uncertainty, that also leads to uncertainty in individual donors. And so those nonprofits thinking, how's my annual fund going to do this year? Then we look at the uncertainty in staffing. All of these pressures make it really hard for our amazing individuals working in the nonprofit sector. And so that can lead to burnout. And also when you say, okay, great, we need to invest in fundraising and hire someone, it's hard to hire right now too. And then that leads to what I'm really seeing is just that uncertainty in planning. And that it's harder to plan further than tomorrow or this 6 months, or how can we really look 3 years down the road and be really thinking big when we're not exactly sure what's going to happen to this funding or these things in the next 6 months. And so I think that's what we're feeling a lot, and nonprofits are trying to navigate that uncertainty.
Annette.
The last year has been quite a ride for all nonprofits, particularly for Food Bank of Iowa. At the tail end of last year, we went from delivering 100,000 pounds of food a day to our partners to 170,000 pounds of food a day. So we have an expression around the office at Food Bank of Iowa, we're getting really good at doing hard things. What Nikki says is true. Fundraising is far from certain. The realities we deal with are far from certain, as they are in the business community. We rely, to some extent, on USDA food. Even though Food Bank of Iowa is not federally funded, those we serve rely on federal funding for SNAP and WIC, and we rely to some extent on USDA food, which has become also very unpredictable.
Jo Christine, I'll have you go next.
As a funder, I would echo everything that Nikki and Arnett said. Our perspective really pulls on the thread that Nikki raised around the impact of an uncertain economy. As a fully endowed foundation that does not take annual contributions from its corporate creator, Principal Foundation relies on the performance of that endowment. And when it is bumpy, when it is unpredictable, and you have a board consisting of a lot of actuaries who are risk averse, right? That's not a statement of positive or negative, good or bad. It's a statement of fact, right? It impacts what we can give and how we can give. The way we've reacted to that in 2026 is to restrict our grant portfolio to those 90 entities that are already in the portfolio and triple clicking down on them, right, by extending multi-year grants to ensure that they remain stable and that they remain confident that at least Principal Foundation will be with them through this particular storm. I know that that's not an option for all funders. I also know that that's not the ethos of all funders. Luckily, for the 90 entities that are currently in our portfolio, that is the ethos of our board and of Principal Foundation's leadership, and we hope to continue to move that forward. The downside is that we aren't able to step in to support the other entities that are doing important work, that are doing crucial work, that are doing work that ensures that our community stays stable for the rebuilding that will need to occur when the tide shifts again. But it's the current reality. Thanks.
The microphone on, that'll be the biggest accomplishment. I think you're already hearing one of the big trends, of course, is this uncertainty. And I want to be the first person in this panel to say, nonprofit is a tax status, not a business model. So everything that small businesses are facing is the same thing that all of our nonprofits are facing. So a troubling economy, workforce challenges, insurance getting more expensive, these are the same things that the sector we are here representing are also facing. But I think the thing from the nonprofit perspective that may be a little bit different is that we also face a huge case-making hurdle. And that has been an interesting trend over the last year. In particular, is this sense of needing to justify your existence has really increased, it seems like, and the pressure to demonstrate your value and the need probably to play a little more defense than offense. And that takes time away from your ability to play offense and be looking forward. And particularly in the creative sector, taking risk is a huge part of the value that we add. And it's challenging times to be in a risk-taking posture. So that's one of the trends that we're seeing on behalf of arts and culture.
So I would definitely echo the theme of uncertainty. And then Annette spoke a little bit to this, but I think we're really seeing a recalibration of need in our community. So as I think everyone is aware, there are increased pressures on individuals in our community. And the nonprofit sector is really serving so many of those folks in need. We are seeing increasing need in our community. We talk about folks that are ALICE. It's an acronym that refers to asset limited, income constrained, and generally employed folks. Those are families that are struggling to make ends meet. And here in Central Iowa, 1 in 3 households is in that ALICE category of really just struggling to make ends meet. And so, I think we all sort of see that, or, we know that the pressures are increasing, but it is, manifesting in things like Annette talking about the, number of pounds of food going out to families in need. We're also seeing some concerning trends. Census data just came out fairly recently. And while we had seen over the course of time folks that are in extreme poverty, that had been on a downward trend for a number of years. Unfortunately, that increased in this latest census data. And so we are seeing, more than 60,000 folks in Central Iowa who are in that extreme poverty category. And so we know that those pressures are resulting in, more folks reaching out to nonprofits. We hear from, we work with a number of nonprofits in the community, more than 100 nonprofits, really spanning the scope of very large nonprofits to small, volunteer-run nonprofits. And what they're reporting is that not only are they seeing increased numbers of folks coming to them, but the complexity of the needs that individuals are presenting with is increasing substantially. And that puts incredible pressure on those nonprofits.
I think I got this here.
Yep, sorry.
Can you hear me okay? Okay. So, yes to what my fellow panelists have said here. I serve as the executive director of the Iowa Coalition Against Domestic Violence, and we support 25 nonprofits across the state of Iowa. They serve all 99 counties, and they serve survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, human trafficking, child abuse, and other gender-based violence issues. We've been doing this work for 40 years, and in the last decade, at least for the state, in the last 12 years, we have not received an increase in funding. So when we're talking about stagnant funding, we're talking about people who are in very traumatic circumstances. And our model of services is a 24/7 response model. which means a victim advocate is there to support a survivor at a hospital when they were sexually assaulted. They're there to support a survivor when they want to pursue a protection order and navigate the court system. Legal advocacy, medical advocacy, safety planning is the core of victim services work. And so victim services are not being prioritized at the state level and at the federal level. Just like my fellow panelists have said, the funding has remained stagnant. So what happens is that we have a problem with the workforce. We cannot retain people because we have a high demand for services post-COVID. This has increased, and I'll talk a little bit further about that increase in demand for services. But then, one of the other second points of pressure that I want to make sure you all know is that as a victim services workforce that depends on federal dollars to do this hard work, we are seeing a significant change in administrative policies, significant change in grant conditions that also add barriers to the work that we do on the ground. And this comes because of the slew of executive orders that came out early last spring, and the grant conditions that we received from the federal government immediately started to shift and change in order to prevent serving underserved communities. The anti-DEI language, the anti-LGBTQ plus language, the anti-immigrant language is all inserting itself in federal grants, and that is a huge barrier to supporting victims. We and our values stand strong, which is we support all crime victims regardless of who they are. And so that is also important for me to share in this space, but also beyond this space. You need to understand that when you are a nonprofit director that is managing federal dollars, these are the things that they're doing inside our grant funding that is not congressionally approved. These are things that are arbitrary and are happening to us. And the work that we already do is really hard. And now we have to defend those barriers and those challenges, and I can share more about how we have done that over the last year.
Thank you so much, everyone, for your remarks. Obviously, directly, indirectly, funding on the public funding aspect has had a significant influence on nonprofits in this past year. So I want to go a little bit deeper on what that's meant for some of the organizations. Here, Erin, I was wanting to maybe start with you for United Way. I know in your comments before the event, you said there was a survey that showed about $7.9 million that was done in August last year, and that at that time, $7.9 million had been lost. With all of the fluctuation that happened with public funding last year, could you kind of catch us up on where we are now and what some of that, what that change has meant for United Way's partners?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you've heard from my colleagues here, there has just been an incredible amount of uncertainty. And sometimes that has looked like, Dr. Corona referenced the executive orders that, may or may not have sort of clear guidance on what the impact will be. So sometimes that has resulted in concrete funding changes for nonprofits. Other times it has just led to a sense of uncertainty, of nonprofits not being sure, what the funding landscape is going to look like over the next several months. And so what we've seen over the past year is both kind of concrete changes to the funding streams. Federal level, definitely, we're also seeing a certain amount of that at the state level. But really, you think about a nonprofit trying to plan into the future, if they are not sure if they can rely on historical funding streams, that creates both a level of uncertainty and an inability to sort of plan for the future. And so, we have talked to so many of our nonprofits. We heard from them that sort of loss at that point in our survey respondents, just shy of $8 million. And that is a slice of the nonprofit sector, right? This is not encompassing everyone out there. So you can imagine the impacts that has across the broad sector. And we are just continuing to see those changes, whether it's state legislation or executive orders that are now being put into practice. Again, this gets a little into the nitty-gritty of like federal grants, but there are a lot of nuances that go into the federal grant-making process that could either disqualify organizations that have historically received federal grant funding or would cause them to not be able to deliver programs in the same way. And so that means that nonprofits have to really think, as they're thinking about what do effective programs look like? How does this align with our mission? And now you layer this additional aspect on of having to decide whether or not you try to meet those new grant expectations, which may or may not align with the programs that have been working here in central Iowa. And so, you see nonprofits thinking differently about the way that they are delivering services. I think we have been so impressed at the nimbleness and the creativity that we've seen across the sector given the moment that we are in. And I think that is amazing and incredible. But we have to acknowledge that the time that they have to spend now rethinking, where do we focus our efforts? How do we design our programs? That is time that they can't spend on delivering those services to folks in our community that have those increasing needs that we are seeing increasing year over year. And so it creates a really challenging situation for those nonprofits.
So just last week, our funding appropriation bills passed through Congress, and this Tuesday, President Trump signed them into law. So while we are cautiously optimistic, right, that this is moving forward, that the investment from Congress in victim services work across the United States and territories is going forward, this same situation happened last year. We had Congress that passed our appropriation bills, our funding bills, to do this work across the nation, and then soon after that we had the Doge situation, and then the administration, the Trump administration rescinded and clawed back $800 million from just one office, the Office of Victims of Crime, an office that is dedicated to do violence prevention work and work to support crime victims across the U.S. $800 million were rescinded last spring, arbitrarily. And so when we're talking about major impacts and what's happening to the work on the ground, we're talking about significant dollars that we can't fundraise. We cannot fundraise our way out of this. These needs to be the commitment of the public dollars to support crime victims is there because that's where we get the congressional appropriations, right? Congress has the power of the purse. And now we're seeing these arbitrary and capricious ways of going back and reviewing what are the things that are politically aligned with the current administration's policy agendas. And that is problematic because we know that most of the time underrepresented communities of color, historically excluded communities are the ones that are disproportionately impacted by violence and by poverty and by hunger and by health inequity. We know that's true and we know that's the evidence. The CDC had a bunch of evidence around this, and so that is problematic and we really cannot ignore where we are today. So while I'm cautiously optimistic, right, that we did pass our appropriation bills, we don't know what could happen because we saw that play out in 2025.
Yeah, Maria, I wanted to ask about, we recently chatted about ICAVA being a part of the lawsuit that stopped some of those arbitrary restrictions on grants from the Department of Justice. And I know that the court ordered that preliminary injunction to stop the restrictions from being enforced. What were you guys navigating and considering when you were facing these restrictions? And how does that affect your ability to serve your mission?
That is such a great question. And besides what my colleagues have said here in terms of having to plan and having to think through what would happen if we were to be defunded and having to think of your staff, right, because they have livelihoods that depend on this work. It takes people to serve survivors. It takes people to serve victims. It takes people to hand out tons of pounds of food, right? It takes people. And so for us, it was really an impossible decision. Either we comply under these new grant conditions that were telling us that if a survivor who happened to have an accent or be an immigrant
regardless if we knew they had status or not, that we would close the doors on a shelter when they were seeking services, that we would not accommodate a transgender victim of sexual assault because that was the priority and the conditions were vague enough for people to make interpretations, for the field to make interpretations upon themselves. There was no clear guidance around how we were supposed to meet these conditions and also meet the law, because the Violence Against Women Act protects all survivors, regardless of your immigration status, regardless of your gender identity, or racial ethnic background. So the Violence Against Women Act, and actually, I want to say in this space that that's before my time. The Violence Against Women Act was strong advocacy efforts by survivors, by women, the feminist movement in this country that were able to advocate for the Violence Against Women Act passage. And because of that law, the Violence Against Women Act, and it's a bipartisan effort too, because of that law, we were able to challenge these conditions and file 2 lawsuits. And the one that Macy's speaking about is against the Department of Justice, to say, you cannot tell us to change the way we do the work because the Violence Against Women Act protects all survivors, regardless of who you are. And so we were able to miraculously, we were able to find this national group called Democracy Forward, who help us do this pro bono. For the field, this is a huge impact. We were able to win and received a preliminary injunction, and the case is moving forward. And so we were able to have those conditions stay. That means that those conditions could not be applicable to the grants, the millions of dollars that impact the work of survivor services. Thank you.
Sally, I wanted to go to you next. So with Bravo's regional funding model, I know we talked a little bit about the state level changes having almost more direct impact on the arts and culture sector. Could you tell us a little bit more about what you're seeing there and the effects on Bravo's partners?
Yeah, that's a 2-hour conversation. That's a 2-hour conversation. And I want to be respectful that just as all of these organizations are facing financial pressures, so are our cities. The tax climate is such that we are competitive, reaching for talent, and one of the ways to do that in business attraction is to address the tax climate in the state of Iowa. And one of the impacts of some of the policies that are being proposed and discussed at the state level is putting significant pressure on cities and the ability of cities to leverage the funds that they have available to invest in the services that residents in communities rely on and count on. That could be anything from police officers, and potholes, and trash collection, alongside the choice that many of our metro cities make, which is to invest a portion of their hotel, motel tax dollars, it's really sexy stuff, into Bravo Greater Des Moines, so that Bravo can then invest those dollars into arts and culture. Those hotel, motel tax dollars, and I won't go into the state code, but there are requirements for those dollars. They do have to be spent for recreation, tourism, and so Bravo and Catch Des Moines are good partners with our cities, but there is flexibility in that language, and the state tax pressure on cities is causing cities to consider, is that the best use of those available funds? And what that means for Bravo, 98% of our revenue comes from those hotel motel tax dollars. We don't do any additional fundraising. So if our funding gets cut by cities making difficult decisions, then the 83 nonprofit organizations that we are supporting are going to be impacted by those decisions. Bravo is, for most of the organizations we support, their single largest annual donor. So you can just imagine the trickle-down effects of those state policies impacting city budgets, impacting Bravo's budget, and then impacting all of the downstream organizations.
Yeah, and I know you also mentioned that where some nonprofits, like Erin was saying, are seeing that increase in demand, more of the challenge for nonprofit or for arts and culture nonprofits is decrease in demand, and maybe with economic uncertainty, maybe less engagement around that. What are you seeing in that area?
Yeah, again, nonprofits are not a monolith. We're as different as any business, and increased demand for some health and human services, as Erin's talking about, certainly need there. For some of our arts and culture nonprofits, for some people that is considered discretionary spending, and so we're seeing a reduction in attendance. We're definitely seeing trends for people buying tickets much later. So whereas you used to commit to a season ticket package and the program could count on having you come and being there, now people are like, will call lines are longer than they've ever been because people are making those decisions on a shorter horizon. The investments are just getting a little bit tighter. It's hard to know what your critical mass is to be putting on a program. And I think arts and culture are in an interesting spot because they have funders' needs to meet, but they also have audience needs to meet, and those don't always align. Sometimes the audiences want the cutting edge, the new, the risk-taking, and that's not always a safe play, and funders are seeking safe plays in some cases. And so I think there's interesting balancing acts being found between donors, the arts and culture nonprofit, and then the audiences.
Annette, for you, food banks and pantries have faced multiple disruptions rather than the direct loss of federal funding, like you mentioned, that Food Bank of Iowa isn't federally funded, but most notably, federal policy changes concerning SNAP has really disrupted the industry. Can you recap for us where changes to those policies have created pressure on funding or operations for Food Bank of Iowa?
Absolutely. When there's less federal support for poverty relief and it's harder to qualify for SNAP, people have nowhere else to turn but the charitable food system, and that's us. So bottom line, our funding pressures, all the others that have been mentioned here, but our greatest one is trying to meet our mission, trying to get Iowans facing hunger the food they need to thrive. We've been dealing with rising and record need for nearly 4 years now. At times, certainly at the tail end of last year, it seems overwhelming, but we've got to be there for Iowans who are facing food insecurity. We can never fill the gap that SNAP fills, because for every meal the charitable food system provides, SNAP provides 9. It is the most effective anti-hunger relief program in history. So a strong SNAP program, a strong farm bill would be a help as well. But bottom line, more people in Iowa need help with food than ever before. Food costs more, and it costs more to get it here. That's where the fundraising is so critically needed. One of our fundraisers is here in the room, Dawn Garvey. Dawn, wave, wherever you are. Yeah, way in the back. So we've had to get more and more creative with our fundraising, finding sponsors for school pantries, finding sponsors, organizations who want to sponsor their volunteer shift. All of those things are helping us to meet the need, but in all this uncertainty, the one thing that is for sure is that the numbers of people who need help with food are not getting smaller, they're only getting larger.
Annette, you mentioned some of the things that you're doing to be creative. Are there other thoughts on things how you're adjusting right now, whether it's demand for services or demand for dollars? What are some of the ways that that's being addressed right now?
Well, one thing we've done is to add another parking lot near our building so that we can welcome more visitors from the community, more volunteers, more volunteer shifts, concurrent volunteer shifts, different types of volunteer projects, so that we can get more food in the door, because as fast as the food comes in the door, it goes right back out. It is not a food museum. If you've ever come to visit Food Bank of Iowa, it's literally food in, food out. You may have seen we received 69,000 pounds of ham from Fairway last week. It'll be gone in 3 weeks.
Any other thoughts on ways that nonprofits are adapting and navigating in the current environment?
Yeah.
We aren't we're a nonprofit in tax status, but we aren't a service delivering nonprofit. Principal Foundation has always prided itself in being in pursuit of becoming the funder of choice for nonprofits we invite to apply for our grant. And what we mean by that is we want to use more tools in a funder's toolkit than what people think about. So all funders give money, right? But funders have access to other resources that they don't always put forth for organizations. One we like to use is our bully pulpit. An example of that is actually something we did with the business record when we had heightened discussions in the community around food security. We sponsored a series. They were ads that were more like articles to educate the community on what hunger looks like and what are the ways to address hunger in the community. What are the different pieces in the ecosystem that need to be at play, active and stable in order to bring the numbers down? And what that series showed is that it runs from transportation. Yes, that plays a role. You can't eat a bus, but you can sure ride one to get some food, right? All the way to the food pantries and the small organizations that are filling the gaps between where food is and where food is needed, right? Those are educational pieces, PSAs, if you will, that nonprofits rarely have the excess to pay for, but we do, right? And because of the other relationships, we might be able to do that in a more cost-effective way and reach a broader audience. We're attempting to duplicate that work in Charlotte, which is another city of great importance to Principal. Another thing that I want to talk about is the way we've evolved our employee volunteerism. So Principal employees are exceedingly generous individuals, and as Chris mentioned in his opening remarks, that is a generosity that is fostered, promoted, and rewarded from the top down in our organization. But there were gaps. We have employees who have deep passion but didn't know where to give, or they weren't clear on what the policies are that allow them to give, or they had certain ideas on where the giving should take place. Another tool we can bring to that toolkit is highlighting how they can interact with entities that are grantees or not, right, to improve the bottom line for those entities. So for every shift where employee volunteers get together to deliver meals for Wesley Life Meals on Wheels, or to pack food kits, to unpack boxes, whatever it is at Urbandale Food Pantry, wherever it is, right? That's $1 that organization can save and then allocate to something else, other needs. And then the last thing is providing platform for entities to tell their own stories. It was mentioned earlier, there's a deeper emphasis on case making. In fall of 2025, we hosted a storytelling workshop for our grantees in Charlotte, a municipality that's under great pressure, higher increase in cost of living, a larger population, a whole lot of things. And what we were after there is increasing their ability to tell their own stories, but then taking that a step further to help them identify the threads that run between their individual stories. It is an ecosystem. So you might not realize that a food pantry has something in common with the CDFI, but they do. They're often serving the same population, or a population that's connected in a Venn diagram. Again, we brought National Geographic, a great storytelling entity, to provide that learning, those learning sessions for the organizations, not something that they may have been able to do themselves, but that's a high quality learning opportunity, high quality workshop with great output that we as a funder who seeks to be the funder of choice brought to the community, having them meet one another, having them figure out what those threads are to set them up for success, not only in their storytelling to individual fundraisers, which is the majority of the funders in this country, right? But also to increase their ability to advocate for policy and to advocate for corporations to maintain funding or increase funding in those instances where they have some uncertainty.
One other thing that I would add is that we are seeing increased collaboration across our communities to address these big issues. So the work that individual nonprofits are doing to serve individuals and families is crucially important. And we know that the issues that, particularly in the health and human services sector of the nonprofit area, is that these are issues that no one nonprofit can tackle themselves. And I think, everybody is always interested in collaboration. Sometimes it is really challenging to take the time and space to come together and work as a community to address these issues. And that is even harder in a time like this where the pressures are increasing. That said, we are seeing a lot of work around several of these big issues. Take, for instance, food insecurity. Our community came together a couple of years ago to really think about food insecurity at a community level. How can we all work collaboratively, nonprofit, business, public sector? How do we work cross-collaboratively to address these big systemic issues, working together, ensuring that we're leaning into the strengths of individual entities and working together to solve these issues. Homelessness is another issue where the community has come together, created a strategic plan to address homelessness, the blueprint to address homelessness, to really think about these issues on a systems level, thinking about root causes, thinking about how we all work together to solve these big issues. And I think that becomes even more important in the landscape that we are in. No one has wiggle room to, work ineffectively or, duplicate efforts. We all are really driven to figure out how we work most effectively together and come together as a community. There's a role for everyone in that, and I think we've seen that more and more, and I suspect that will be a direction that our community continues to move in.
I'll piggyback on both of those things. First, in terms of collaboration, I partner with a market research firm and conduct a biennial survey on philanthropic giving trends in Central Iowa. It's out today, so check my website. Anyway, the idea is just to help nonprofits work smarter, not harder. And what I've heard in the last two reports, and was really emphasized again this year, is that donors want to see collaboration. They feel that we have a lot of people doing the same thing, a lot of efforts happening for back office that could be duplicated, or that are duplicated, that could be consolidated. And I know, as someone who's been in the sector on the other side, collaboration is hard. And I've had a lot of people ask over these, as these reports are coming out, what does that mean and how can we do that? And I think there's this fear in a nonprofit in saying, if I'm collaborating, that means my organization isn't doing a good enough job on its own. And that's not the case. Donors they understand we've got a great system and ecosystem, and they're supporting a lot. And so be thoughtful and proud and saying, yes, we have this program that's working together, or yes, we saw that this organization over here is doing an outstanding job. We are as well, but we knew we could work better together. And I think what I would urge nonprofits to do is not be afraid to think about how can you truly, truly collaborate, work together, and what are those systems that even maybe you could consolidate together. And then jumping off of what Joe Christine said, what I found more and more is that relationships matter. And so 20 plus years ago, when I started in fundraising, you'd write the grant to the corporation, you'd get the money, you'd put their logo on your program or on your playbill, and you'd move on, and then a year later, you'd apply for the same thing. And corporate funding is tough right now, right? And so it can't just be about writing the grant and moving on. They want relationships and ways to help, and that takes a lot of time. So the other thing I would encourage nonprofits to think about is don't be afraid to ask your funders, what do you want to hear? How can we work together more? Even those individual donors, how do you want to hear from us? Because donors are giving because they believe in the mission and they want to be a part of it. So don't be afraid to think collaboratively, really don't be afraid to ask questions and build those relationships.
Nikki, in your report, both individuals and corporations and foundations, for about half of them, said they were going to keep their giving the same.
Yeah.
And how does that compare to recent years? And did the survey find different factors that were driving those decisions?
Yes, so one question I ask is did your giving increase or increase from the past year? But then what we all want to know, what are you planning for next year? And so for individuals, 52% think that their philanthropic giving will stay the same. For corporations and foundations, 56% think it'll stay the same. Not a lot said they would decrease, which we did see 2 years ago. But what does that mean? That means that every single one of you nonprofits in this room, you have increased costs. And you have an increased goal, and your board is saying raise more dollars, right? So when you see that flat giving across half of your donor base, that means that then you need to find additional donors. But we know that we have our Alice, there's just a lot of pressures. And so what they were citing was that they're stepping in where they can. Our individuals see that if they can step in where they see there's been those federal cuts, they want to, but their income has been restricted. And they're seeing constraints, whether it's family related or I'm not sure what my retirement's going to do. And so that's really helping, or making those investments a little bit more restrictive.
Yeah, so overall, that economic uncertainty is certainly playing a role in giving right now. Are there any other examples of how that's showing up for the nonprofits here today?
What I can say is for the victim services work, we have already regionalized. This was happening in 2013, which meant that we needed to make sure that the state was covered for services, and nonprofits began merging to one organization to ensure there was a shelter in each region, to ensure there was a sexual assault rape crisis center in each region, and so on, a domestic violence service in each region, and so on. So this happened when the funding cuts were at 8%. And in the last year, we saw the VOCA fund cuts at a 42%. So as much as we try to consolidate and try to ensure there's no duplication in the structure and organizational infrastructure, governance, and all those things, we have done it all over time. And other states are looking at Iowa's models of victim services to try to replicate that, knowing that the federal fluctuations of federal dollars are at risk and vulnerable in this moment. But we've done what we could. And speaking on that issue, some of you may have already seen our press release around our consolidation or our transition into one unified coalition. So ICADVA is currently working through a transition with our sister coalition, Iowa CASA, the Sexual Assault Coalition, that we've worked in partnership for 40 years. So when you're all talking about finding those collaborative spaces, sometimes it is about figuring out if it makes sense in this moment in history to unify it as one organization to secure stability. And a lot of this also comes with a lot of ego, right? Like people want to be the leader, people want to stay alive and make sure that they know that they're successful. But we have to also play it safe as possible, while also challenging the things that are illegal and that the Congress has not allowed. But we have to play it safe and be strategic. And so that is what ICADVA is undertaking for 2026.
One of the other interesting things that I think is kind of unseen about all of the uncertainty is that it's creating a very competitive environment among the nonprofit sector. So it's at this moment where the community is asking for collaboration and is asking for shared, and there's $1 and one of you is going to get it. And I think there's a lot of difficulty there. One of the challenges, and again, I'm wearing a couple of hats here, but one of the challenges I think is that donors are making decisions for the entire community about what is essential. And I think that creates stratification within the nonprofit sector about which are the important ones and which are the ones that should be valued. And I just think we have to make sure that we as individual donors, or in Bravo's case, as a large community-based funder, that we are not overstepping and making decisions about what is essential for everyone. Again, I truly believe that every nonprofit exists for a reason. And is providing services that are valued by someone. And I get a little uncomfortable when we get into conversations about what is the most important or what is the essential services, because I'm not sure those are decisions we as individual donors or individual nonprofit representatives get to make for an entire community.
I'd like to pick up on this idea of collaboration and then, quite frankly, what is a merger, right? So prior to going into philanthropy, I practiced corporate restructuring for 20 years. That is a distressed merger. And what you're talking about in this sector right now are distressed mergers, right? I raise that because when I go back to my comment around Principal being a funder that endeavors to use more of the tools in its funder toolkit, when the proverbial stuff hit the fan, right, in 2025, out of our 90 grantee portfolio, we had 4 of them at risk of going under. Rather than seeing something that was valuable to your point, Sally's point, around funders saying what's important, what isn't important, we asked them to be creative around what they do to ensure survival. Because even though it may not be a service that is in Des Moines or a service that I can quantify as important, someone was using it because it existed for 20 or 30 years, right? So one example is an entity that was providing financial services and business planning for creatives based in Brooklyn. They couldn't make it anymore. Where is it now? It's with a nonprofit with a fantastic history and staff in Minneapolis. Right? So it's not only in the same, it moved across the country, it's with a completely different set of folks, but they still get to serve that same population. And rather than put the new entity through the hell that is trying to recruit us as a funder, we committed to having the funding follow them. Right? We did the same thing with an organization in Charlotte, an organization in Washington, D.C., and unfortunately there is one organization where we said, it just ain't working. So it did go under. But that is not only the nonprofit and that nonprofit's leadership, right, putting the ego aside, but it's also the funder stepping aside to saying, we're committed to supporting that work and looking for ways to have the people who are the most affected figure out how to make sure that work survives and the people are still served. And to Nikki's point about relationship, Principal Foundation has in recent years asked for some things, I'd say particularly among the nonprofits we serve in Des Moines. We've asked for things that seemed unusual or real creative, right? But that were important to us about building that relationship, right? One example is, especially here in Des Moines, you'll have an entity that asks for grant dollars and then they want to ask for sponsorship dollars. Well, they come from the same group. They may be different budgets, but they're coming from the same group. So why don't we wrap into the grant what you're asking for on the sponsorship side or vice versa, but we aren't going to double dip. Right? We had some nonprofits see the vision in that, and we had others talk about what was fair or unfair or whatever the case may be. But what I'd ask nonprofits to do is pause, just like we pause and think about things from your perspective, pause and think about things from our perspective and the pressures we have, right? The fact that someone might like going to your event doesn't mean that they're funding it or that they're going to be the one inside the company advocating for the funding to stay in place. So it works both ways.
Well, I'd like to piggyback on what all of our speakers have said, but also add a little bit of a bright spot in this competitive environment in regard to collaboration. We're fortunate to be part of a community where people really want to see everyone's basic needs met. And collaboration is a bedrock of what we do at Food Bank of Iowa. I see some of our partners in the room, Patty from Urbandale Food Pantry, and Audrey from West Des Moines Human Services, and there may be others here in the room that I didn't get an opportunity to visit with, but we've also seen nonprofits step up for one another in terms of collaboration. I think about Chuck Curran at Meals from the Heartland, who last summer, when we were truly overwhelmed trying to execute Healthy Kids Iowa, and so were 125 of our partners, he said, hey, we've got a truck and a driver, we could help you one day a week. And we have a fleet of trucks, but that one truck and that one driver helped us out tremendously, and he didn't have to do that. He picked up the phone and offered. That's the spirit of collaboration that we have in this community. Not only does when hard things happen, not only does the community rise to the occasion, but we rise to the occasion for one another.
I wanted to pull that thread of case making and kind of what's considered important within our community and who's deciding that. A leader of a local nonprofit shared with me recently that one of their organization's biggest challenges is defining its value position so more people would see that their specific work was valuable to them within the community. And we know that people tend to donate their hard-earned dollars, which we've talked about are very limited in the moment, to causes that they either care about deeply or they feel connected to or have had their lives changed, impacted by. How is that showing up for other nonprofits in trying to make your case for why maybe you deserve or could use that money in this competitive landscape?
One thing that I encourage my nonprofits to think about, that I think because when we're in a nonprofit, we're working so hard and going so fast that we don't always pause to think, is what is the exact need that we are fulfilling? And why are we best poised to meet that need? And then, there's the data and all of that people want to see, which is hard sometimes, but I think it's just taking that one step back and saying, what's that need and why are we best at that? And how can you answer that? And then things springboard from there.
I do a lot of this wearing my Bravo hat. I effectively have 17 donors. They're all elected officials. I have to make sure that I'm speaking their language and being responsive to their needs and priorities. I think sometimes as nonprofit professionals, we do what we do because we're passionate about it. We do what we do because we love it and it's meaningful. And we want everyone to feel that way. Sometimes you just got to talk about the economic impact, right? Sometimes you got to talk about workforce. Sometimes you have to talk about what the donor wants to hear, not the passion and the love and the storytelling. And sometimes I think there's a disconnect between what nonprofits want to talk about and what nonprofits need to be talking about. So Bravo just produced a one-page document that clearly lines up all of the data that we have about the role of arts and culture in workforce, in tourism, in talent attraction, in economic impact. These are the things that the elected officials are talking about right now. Is that what I want to lead with? Absolutely not. I want to talk about creativity. I want to talk about the inspiration that a child feels when they see themselves doing something they never thought they could do because they saw someone on stage. I mean, I would love to talk about that. Right now, my job is to talk about economic impact and $309 million worth of economic impact, 5,677 jobs, and that's my job, and it's fine. But you got to do both, is my point. And I think nonprofits need to continue to work on the stories they want to tell and the stories they need to tell.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would echo what my colleagues have shared. I think particularly that unique position that nonprofits are in, as we're talking about partnerships and collaboration and sometimes consolidating nonprofits, I think from the outside, sometimes it can feel like, we have that nonprofit is doing about what that nonprofit is doing, which is about what that nonprofit is doing. And when you really look under the hood, when you have a deep understanding of what those nonprofits are providing, most of the time, there is a real unique value that they are bringing to the community, which is not to say that folks shouldn't be thinking about collaboration, but I hope that we can all think expansively about what collaboration looks like, and recognize that, from, certain vantage points, it could seem like, yeah, we should just kind of all consolidate and come together. That may feel simple, but it is not easy. When we look at nonprofits that have come together, that is most of the time a very long, intentional, and complex process. And that we have so many nonprofits in this community that have a very unique value or a very unique position in the community. And I think the more that we can do to support nonprofits in telling that story, in sharing their unique value to the community, in positioning it in a maybe slightly different way than we have talked about in the past, I think we will all be stronger as a community. And then I think as community members, for us to think about, whether it's through a donor lens or whatever your position may be, really get to understand what those nonprofits in our community are doing. If you have a passion or an interest, whether that's volunteering or serving on a board, get to know the unique value that those nonprofits in our community are providing, because there are a lot of differences. And I think that that's really crucial for our community to understand, that it's much more nuanced when you go deep and really understand what our nonprofits are providing here in Central Iowa.
So one of the highlights that I pulled out from Nikki's report that I got a sneak peek at before today was the change in which issues you see dollars going toward, and there was a significant decrease for issues around DEI and poverty and income equality. Maria, I wanted to ask you, as you're thinking about that kind of case making, issue, how is ICADVA thinking about that, and particularly when federal funding is a pressure point, what are some of the considerations there for your organization?
Yeah, sure. So I respect every nonprofit's leader's strategy around this, because we are navigating uncertain waters, uncertain time, and the word of today is uncertainty. But what I will say for ICADVA, and the reason why I was chosen as the executive director of ICADVA, and my board supports us in how we've challenged back, pushed back, filed lawsuits, and remained true to our mission and to our organizational values. I will continue to do that, no matter what the challenges that come for us. Because if we don't do it, we have a tremendous negative impact on the field, and true life-saving services, access to services in this work is not about meeting rent and maybe going into eviction, which is horrendous. But this is life-saving work. Specifically, we're talking about people that are fleeing a domestic violence situation, and that is where they are most at risk. So I'm not pivoting away from our mission. I'm not pivoting away from our organizational values. And I actually want to encourage all of us to stand on those values, 10 toes down, like I say, on those values. That means committed, loyalty, and the work of the mission of the organization is the priority. Because when we start shifting and changing our language and erasing the important life stories of people, like erasing the word transgender, or erasing the word immigrant, or erasing the word health equity, we are complying in advance. We are allowing these conditions and these federal changes to dictate what the evidence shows us is real. Like we said here, the factual evidence. We know we have years of data that shows underrepresented community members are disproportionately impacted by violence. So I will not pivot, I will not change how we talk about this issue, and we will continue to provide support to victims across Iowa, regardless of their identity, regardless of their immigration status, regardless of their gender preferences. We will continue to support all survivors, because the truth is that we want all Iowans to feel safe, all Iowans to feel safe. And we believe survivors. And so that is how I'm navigating it. I'm just going forward with our mission.
Nikki, also in your report, and we had talked a little bit about how nationally, individual donors are the largest contributors, but then in Des Moines, you mentioned that that's more weighted toward corporate. So with funding, looking to be more stagnant across different types of donors, what does that weight toward corporate mean for Des Moines?
Yeah. So one reason why I wanted to initiate this study was there's a lot of national studies on what's national and nationally happening in the philanthropic world, but Des Moines, we know we are special, we are different, and so I wanted to really understand what are our funders saying here. So nationwide, 75% of philanthropic giving comes from individual donors. That is not the case for the majority of nonprofits that I work with. And we have been very reliant on our incredibly generous corporate community. But as mergers happen and priorities change, that is not quite as reliable, and we've seen that in public funding as well. When you look at individuals, think about how your values hold true. And so your individual donors are your most consistent and loyal donors because there's not those corporate pressures. They're giving with how their values align. And so I really encourage nonprofits to think about how can we really strengthen our individual donor base? How can we grow and build our individual donor base? Especially as we see the great transfer of wealth will be happening over the next 20 years, where I think nationwide it's $124 trillion is going to transfer from boomers to the next generation. And so how are we cultivating that next generation of donors? And I know that's also a feeling of angst for our nonprofits and for some of those donors who know they're not going to be around forever.
Yeah, absolutely. So especially at this moment in time when, there is that transition that's going to be happening, I'm curious how, Joe Christine with the foundation, and other nonprofits, how that is, influencing how you think about your own, donors and how you're engaging with them.
So Principal Foundation doesn't fundraise. Our donor is the market. The market does well, our assets do well, and we have more money to give away. With that said, we do have sporadic opportunities for the company to make contributions to Principal Foundation, and usually those arise when it's advantageous for it to do so from a tax perspective. You all may know that the Big Beautiful Bill had some rather drastic changes in the tax treatment of corporate charitable contributions. So we are not optimistic that in the next few years those sporadic opportunities will present themselves. With that said, I do want to lean into the part of your question around the transfer of wealth and the impact of that on individual donors. Principal Foundation is one of the few corporate foundations that still has a rather robust portion of its grant portfolio dedicated to supporting cultural and civic institutions. Those are primarily museums. The Des Moines Art Center is a beneficiary of that, but they are in several cities across the country. And I had the fortune of attending a presentation by a consultant and academician in this area who spoke quite poignantly and explicitly about the impact of the wealth transfer on creatives. So any art-leaning or creative institutions in the room, I'd encourage you to look into the current trends in research, because what they're showing is that few of the next generation see an attachment to arts institutions in the way they are currently formulated. For a lover of art individually, and someone who respects the role of the creative sector in community and economic development, that's a scary thought if the next generation receives that wealth transfer and refuses to invest some of it in the arts sector. Why is that scary? One, we know that where you have rich cultural and civic fabric in a community, you have better community development, you have better economic development, and you have better life outcomes. All the social science research shows that where you have access to the arts, you have improved educational attainment, you have better aging in place, better management of chronic disease. No matter what you want to count, art plays a role in that. And when we're in a time like we find ourselves in now, socio-politically, art is usually the conduit for communities to see their ways through it and to imagine what the next reality can be. So the idea of that being defunded in a drastic way, we're talking about billions of dollars being diverted away from that sector of society, it is terrifying, especially when you think about where it may go. And then last, as a financial services company, right, Principal is endeavoring to help people manage that transfer. And what our research has shown is that very few women who stand to gain from that wealth transfer feel comfortable with the financial sector writ large, or feel prepared to handle that, which would impact the institutions that women tend to give to, right? And issues that impact women.
Nikki, so as nonprofits do look ahead, whether it's individual donors or businesses of any size, whether it's corporate, larger businesses or smaller, how do you see that maybe changing and them engaging maybe differently with donors moving forward given the current environment?
So a couple things that I think are the most important for nonprofits to think about are relationships and ROI, and that's ROI two ways. So, and I've been in your shoes for the nonprofits in the room where it's like, yes, relationships are important, but that's what takes the most time. And how do I build a relationship with the 1,000 donors that are on my list? And so I think it's thinking really creatively about how can you, of course, still have those one-on-one conversations, but how can you have those broader, discussions, or don't be afraid of a donor survey to say, we care about you and we want to know how you want to be communicated with. And so I think kind of really trying to understand what is your donor's why and how can you communicate with them better, and don't be afraid to ask them. And that's going to help your ROI. So the ROI, I always focus on what is the ROI on time for nonprofits, because I think many of you know everything you could do, but there is not enough time in the day to do it. So really thinking, what is going to be the best ROI on my fundraising time? And then how can you show those donors the ROI on their investment? Because it is not just, I'm writing a check to this organization because I always have. Our donors, whether they're individual or corporation, truly see this as an investment in an organization or a cause that they care about, and they want to know that it's a good investment. And so how can you be communicating that? Again, back to case making, but still important.
So I want to move into, we're getting close to our time, but I want to move into talking a little bit about just looking ahead and what maybe potential. So it's not necessarily solving it, but positioning the sector to be as strong as it can be. So maybe Maria, starting with you, just what is your just general outlook at the moment, and maybe expectations for 2026?
Sure. This is the third time I say this word, but we are cautiously optimistic. We are. And, the support of crime victim services is beyond the public dollars, right? 1 in 2 people are impacted by domestic violence in their lifetime. So I know that many of you in this room have been either a child witness of domestic violence in your own home, or experiencing that in your own home, or know somebody that is a survivor of one of these gender-based violence issues. And for us, it's not only about the strong advocacy that needs to continue to happen at the state level, particularly because we have not seen an investment in 12 years, but also to ensure that the grants that we receive from the federal government, which is the majority of the funding of victim services work in Iowa, don't get these added layers of barriers, right? These conditions and this anti-people language is what I call it, that are making its way across sectors, not just the Department of Justice, not just victim services work. Health and Human Services is about to release their NOFO, and we are expecting some of this anti-people language to be embedded in there. And so for us is to continue to do our strong advocacy efforts like we did successfully last week, where we passed our appropriation bills, but also being very aware and on the lookout for these conditions that will be problematic on the ground and serving people. So I wish I had more of a solution focus here, but one thing that I will say is that it takes all of us to really be committed to standing for survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, human trafficking, and so on. And there are ways you can get involved, and there are ways that you can be part of this effort to keep Iowans safe. And I would encourage you to go on our website and connect with us. We're always looking for new board members, but there's ways that you can contribute to the conversation, even at your own, kitchen table. You can contribute to the conversation to end violence across Iowa, across the nation. And if we don't talk about it and we don't get comfortable talking about it, we're going to continue to see what we're seeing today at the highest level of office, right? We're seeing what's happening with violence against women and girls. And so it is important for all of us to make a commitment. Just in this room, you can make a commitment about having the conversations with your kids, with your sons, with your daughters, about what safety looks like, about what consent looks like. And I think that's what I'm looking forward to. I'm looking forward to, in 2026, to continue to be the support system that we have been for our member programs, who are the 25 victim service provider agencies that I mentioned that serve all 99 counties, and to continue to be a resource and partner with foundations that do care about these efforts, that do have the ethos and values in place like we do, where we want to make sure that we don't go back to whatever they want to take us back to, and that we stand for the community, and specifically those disproportionately impacted.
Erin?
As I think to the future, cross-sector collaboration and communities working together is absolutely essential to weathering these challenging times. And so I think that can look like engagement on an individual level, whether that is, volunteering to support a nonprofit that you are passionate about. A plug, we have a volunteer hub on the United Way website if folks want to get engaged in volunteer opportunities, but also thinking about, what does investment in our community look like for not only individuals, but businesses. It is really important that we continue to support at the program level, the programs that are providing services for individuals and families in our communities during these challenging times. And it is important for all of us to think about investment in that systems level change. How do we come together and solve these big picture issues working together? That takes investment of time, that takes investment of resources, and that is work that we all have to do collaboratively. I would also say that I think it's important for us to recognize that we have such a generous community, and we are so grateful for the generosity of our community. And when we look at these shifts in public funding in particular, philanthropy cannot fill that gap that public funds make. And so having conversations in your life with folks that you know, with other stakeholders, to recognize that it takes all sectors, business, public, nonprofits, we all have to come together, we all have a responsibility, and we all have a piece of that puzzle to ensure a strong community, and no one of us can do that alone. And so that systems level collaboration and coordination is absolutely essential to weathering these challenging times.
Just going down the line.
Yeah.
So I think, big takeaway, it's really complex. These are complex times and complex challenges and complex systems. And I think it's important for all of us to sit in the complexity. I think that the easy answers, if they ever existed, they've been tried or done. The low-hanging fruit is gone. We have to work as a community to think beyond where we've been and really look towards the community that we want to be. And where possible, let's use our imagination. This is something the arts sector is really good at. What if we imagined what was possible instead of worrying about the limitations? What if we looked forward? What if we all took a moment to think about the world we want to live in and work towards that? It's a little bit the opposite of what I was saying. Many nonprofits right now are playing a lot of defense. What if we get back to playing offense? What if we lean in and look forward? We have the gift of sitting in front of this beautiful sculpture park right now. It is literally a backdrop. What if we didn't think about the arts as a backdrop? What if we thought about the arts as deeply integrated into the choices our community is making? What possibilities are there? From world-class to hyper-local, I just think there's a lot of potential and possibility in using our imagination.
I'd like to pick up where Sally left off. That's a great point. Something that I said to a friend just yesterday is, rather than focus on the worst case scenario, what if we focused on the best case scenario, right? And using that as fuel to do what Sally mentioned, which is to imagine what tomorrow can look like and to think about what we need to do to ensure that we have the infrastructure in place for that tomorrow to occur. The second thing I'd like to say is that life is a contact sport. We are humans, we are social creatures. I don't think anybody here can point to any bit of evidence that says otherwise. Every time you get in your car and you drive, you count on the social contract that the other car is going the other way. You're going to stop at the red light or stop at the stop sign and give you pass, right? That when you leave your house and lock the door, no one's going to go in there and take your stuff because they happen to like it, right? That is us engaging in that social contract that we all tacitly signed when we decided to stay in the city, when we decided to stay in society and not go off grid and live in the desert or the forest or wherever you want to go, right? And since you've made that decision, you have decided that you're going to engage in that contact sport that is life, right? That requires collaboration. And the third thing I'd say is, in times that are challenging and in times that are lean, the need to collaborate increases, but the feeling to collaborate decreases. And you have to fight against that and lean into the contact sport that living is, that living in society is, and lean into what the best case scenario could be, not just for you, but for your neighbor and for the kids, right? And for the tomorrow that will come, whether we're here or not, it's coming. What are we gonna leave for it to build on?
I like your idea of the best case scenario, because in the best case scenario, no one would be hungry. But as long as there are neighbors in our community who do face food insecurity, Food Bank of Iowa will be here. We've been here for 44 years, and we know that we're providing not just food, not just hope, but when people have the nutrition they need to thrive, they can fulfill their dreams, they can go to school, they can go to work, and they can contribute to a stronger community. That said, the charitable food system can't do it alone. We need better policies to support poverty relief, which is the root cause of hunger, and hunger relief programs themselves.
Oh, I guess I have this, thanks. I would just say, we live in an incredibly generous and caring community. I think we're all so lucky to be here in the Des Moines metro area, because when I look at how people in Des Moines step up, they really do. And our community is generous, and they care, and they want to be involved. I had a lot of clients say, I don't know how, but surprisingly, we had a really good fundraising year. And I think that's because our community sees the need and sees that they want to invest in what they care in. And so I would encourage our nonprofit community to not be afraid to share your story, not be afraid to say, we have a need, or not be afraid to say, can we come to the table and think about how we can figure this out together, because we have an incredibly caring community and a very generous community of supporters, and I think we need to lean in on that.
Can we give our panel here a round of applause? Very quickly came up on the end of our time, so we are going to wrap up here, and I'm going to hand it over to Chris for some final remarks.
Thank you, Sarah. Can we give Sarah and Macy a big round of applause for their moderation? We're so fortunate to have such great team members that can lead conversations like this and great community members as well. Three things I want to leave you with really quickly before we go. First, if you're in the nonprofit community, if you serve on a board, we've got some things on the table. Our donated ad space program is something we've done for years. It's a way for your signature event. We provide 2.5 pages of ads to help support nonprofit events in our community. It's something I'd encourage you to check out. It's free, obviously, and so we would love to help support you and your event in that way in some fashion. The second thing, we've got a number of events that are coming up as well. One that I'll call attention to is 40 Under 40. If you're looking for great people to be involved and on your boards, the 40 Under 40, there's no better group of folks. They're already exceptionally involved. I'll also give you a tip to go back in time and look at past 40 Under 40s as well, because these are some of the most engaged young folks that are giving back in the community, which is a key component of course, as we're thinking about wealth transfer. And then the third thing I'll share, I'll build maybe on what Sally said about case making. Her job is to talk about the economic impact. I think your job in the way that if you can connect the dots to the very specific business needs that your nonprofit is helping to help address. Look at the needs of businesses. The more you're in tune with what their challenges are right now, the better you're going to be in a position to align with that need and continue to get that type of funding and partner with businesses. I think we're seeing more and more businesses that are wanting to find ways to make a difference directly with organizations and find ways to leverage the expertise and skills at nonprofits as well as part of that. So I would encourage you to look for those things. And then lastly, just to wrap up, we're so fortunate to have such great nonprofit leaders here on the panel and in the room. And so I just want to give one more big round of applause to our panelists. And of course, thank you to our sponsors for helping make today happen. We can't do this without the support of you all, and so we really appreciate that. Again, my name's Chris Konetsky. We're at BPC. We're here. We're wanting to help. We're not going to stop talking about the nonprofit community because it's so intertwined into the things that we do as a business community and arts and cultural community. So we encourage you to stay in tune. Tell us, help make your case to us, to our team, because that's how we can best help support the community as well as we go forward. All right. Have a great afternoon. Thank you for being here today.